In today's video, we're going to be talking about same-side castling attacks, common patterns and ideas that occur in these positions, and we will also talk about how famous players such as Bobby Fischer were able to generate monstrous attacks despite being castled on the same side as his opponents. Timestamps are in the description. Enjoy the video. First things first, there is something very important you need to realize when it comes to attacking when both you and your opponent are castled on the same side of the board. And that is that in order to attack your opponent, you need space on that side of the board. Space can be taken in two ways if you want to attack your opponent. It can be taken either with e4, f4, and eventually what you will do is you will play f5 and follow this up with ideas like g4, h4, g5, so just launching all of your pawns after you push the pawn to f5, or you need to take space with e5, and that is the case in this position. And if your opponent chooses to castle on the king side and you also castle on the king side, that will give you a lot of attacking opportunities. Let me skip forward here a little bit to a position where both sides have castled. Let's take a look at this position right here. When it comes to this e5 pawn, it is very important to have it here. Why? First things first, it takes away the f6 square from the knight. The knight could not have been developed to f6, and generally when there is a knight on f6, it is the most important defender of the king because it guards h7, it guards the light squares. However, because of the fact that we're controlling this square, black knight could not go there, and therefore this bishop is very powerful. It is going to be threatening this entire diagonal. This knight is going to feel very uncomfortable here after a couple of moves. Secondly, when we push e5, we fix the pawn on e6 typically, which means that this bishop will struggle to develop to this diagonal. It cannot go to f5, it cannot magically teleport to g4. If it could, then black would be fine. However, in this case, black cannot teleport his bishop. Therefore, this bishop is unable to go over here in order to oppose the bishop on d3, which is going to be the main attacker of the white pieces out of the four minor pieces. This bishop on d3 is the most powerful attacking piece when it comes to these four minor pieces. It aims straight at h7, and with the help of the queen and the knights, this bishop is usually very, very powerful. However, let me show you yet another position. Let me show you a position like this, for example. This is an English opening, and in a position like this, you cannot generate an attack on black. Why? Because you don't have space over there. You have space on this side of the board. Your ideas and plans here are to expand on the queen side, take space over there, and attack that side of the board. Because you don't have space here, you can't just randomly attack the black king and hope that it will work. It will not work. So this right here is a very, very important condition that has to be met in order for you to attack your opponent. You need to have space on that side of the board. If you don't have space, such as in a position like this, where you only have space in the center with ideas of potential queenside expansions, you cannot create a kingside attack. But let's go back to this position. In this position, you have space, therefore you can launch an attack. In this position, you have space, therefore, once again, you can launch an attack. So make sure you guys remember this detail and make sure that the conditions are correct when you decide to launch a same side castling attack. Okay, let's continue looking at this position. How do we actually create an attack on the black king? Well, first things first, we need to take more space. g4. This is defended by the queen and the bishop. It is attacked twice. It is defended twice. This is a well-protected pawn. And after, let's say, black plays c6, trying to go for a d5 pawn break, we go g5. So first things first, why did black play c5? Typically, whenever you're getting attacked on the flank, in this case black is getting attacked on the king side, you want to strike in the center in order to open up the center of the board. However, in this case, d5 is possible, but it is very dangerous to execute it. It is met with f5 and then bishop to f4, so white just develops very, very quickly, and this is a very comfortable position for the white pieces. White is going to go up a pawn, although this very well might be the best way to play. However, it's not very human because you're giving up a pawn and you're giving up a central pawn at that in order to do what exactly? Just play d5, right? Just to open up this bishop that's not really going to be that active because it's looking at granite. It's biting into granite here. It's not really going anywhere. So going back, this is a very tricky position to handle as the black pieces. Let's say black plays c6 in order to set up d5. We will once again continue to take space with g5. In this case, we are kicking this knight away from f6. Once the knight moves away, then we go queen to e1. Now we are trying to transfer our pieces over to the king side in order to continue our attack. Let's say our opponent goes d5, striking in the center. We will continue with f5, counter-attacking. The knight has to move away, and we will continue with queen to g3. Now, in a position like this pawn should not really be taken because then we would activate our knight further and we would quickly play f6. So there's not much that black can do in this position. Let's say black tries c5, we will simply go knight b5. Let's say black tries a6, now we will counter-attack with f6. Now we are trying to open up our opponent's king. So first we took space on this side of the board, then we transferred the pieces here. Now we are trying to open up the king side with f6. A takes b5, we capture on e7, we don't capture on g7 because we are down a piece here. This would not be very good for us. So we get our piece back, and then we take in the center, knight takes d5, attacking the queen. And what you have to realize is that when you're super active, when your pieces are much better than your opponent's pieces, you have the bishop pair, it's a very open position, you have open diagonals, open lines, there's always going to be something. And in this case, that something comes in the form of rook to f6, a phenomenal move. After rook f6, the rook cannot be accepted because then you would get checkmated or you have to give up the queen. So this would of course be winning for the white pieces. If you do something else, let's say you take this with the knight, once again g takes f6, we're still threatening checkmate. How do you deal with this? If you go g6, you will run into bishop h6 and the attack simply continues here. This is not over by any means because then our final piece is getting into the game. And what do you do here? Knight e7 is being threatened. This is a threat on the queen. The queen moves away, then you run into knight e7 and you're getting checkmated here. If you go king h8, there's bishop g7. So there are plenty of patterns here that allow you to win the game very, very quickly. This is extremely dangerous for the black pieces. So in a position like this, let's say we go back, you always have to look for a tactical shot and you always have to look for a way to improve your pieces. So rook to f6, double exclamation mark. Let's say our opponent plays queen to b8, trying to sidestep this sort of an attack over here. Well, first of all, the queen was hanging, so it had to move, but also you are moving it to a square where it is defended. So to be fair, you didn't have much of a choice. So in this position, we would go bishop to f4. Once again, our pieces right now are not enough because remember, we traded off our f6 pawn and we took the bishop on e7. So right now we don't exactly have a way to attack the king. However, we are using a threat on the king. We are using the fact that the king side might open up as a threat in order to create an attack someplace else. In this case, we're also using this pin simultaneously. So in a position like this, let's say g takes f6 was played. In this case, once again, we're either checkmating or winning the queen. However, if this is not played, let's say rook to e8 is played, then we're going to continue with rook to f5, adding one more attacker to this knight. Look at this. This knight on e5 is pinned, it cannot move, it is defended 3 times, and it is also attacked 3 times by the rook, bishop, and the queen, so nothing can move here for black. black is completely paralyzed. You cannot move the queen away, you would lose the knight. You cannot move the knight away because once again you would lose the knight. You cannot develop the bishop because you cannot move the knight away. So this is a horrible position for the black pieces. Let's say you go g6 in order to try something over here. We can even sacrifice the rook. This is not a problem because we can go bishop takes b5. We're threatening just a very simple remove the defender tactic, and this would be completely winning for the white pieces. Let's say you try something like this, queen to a7. We can just take here on e5, and then after knight e5, we can even throw in knight f6, or we can take on e5 first. We're up a piece, and we are completely winning in this position. Okay, now let's take a look at this position right here. And in a position like this, both sides have castled. Let's say black plays this move a6. This move does not really accomplish much in this position, and we can start a massive kingside attack with the white pieces. First things first, we have the two pawns on d4 and e5. The pawns are going this way. Therefore, due to the rule of the chain, follow the chain, we can continue our attack on this side of the board. Check out my rule of the pawn chain video for that. Now in a position like this, we can play this move g4. The knight cannot take the pawn because it is very well defended. It has to go to h4, or it has to go to h6, where it will be taken, and then this will be very, very weak. This is of course uncomfortable for the black pieces. So let's say black tries to go to h4 in order to avoid damaging his structure. In this case, we would capture on h4, and we would play this move king to h1, getting out of the way, preparing to go rook g1 in some positions. Here, let's say our opponent continues with bishop d7, a bit of a lazy move. Here we can go g5. And the idea of g5 is quite simple. We're trying to trap the bishop. For example, queen h5 would threaten checkmate, and it would also threaten this bishop on h4. So black has to do something. Let's say black captures on g5. Here we continue with queen h5 anyways, and after a move like h6, defending, only move to defend h7 and also the bishop at the same time is to play h6. Now we go rook to g1, adding another attacker. Even though our opponent can exchange on c1, this doesn't really help him, because if he exchanges on c1, this doesn't do anything, because after a move like f5, we can take on h6 and we can continue our attack. Actually, in this position, rook takes g7 is even stronger. It just wins the game right away, and black has to sacrifice the queen in order to avoid being checkmated. However, what do you do here as the black pieces? There's not much you can do. You can try f6 in order to try to open up your pieces. However, f4 just simply traps the bishop, and after captures, we capture on g5. Our opponent blocks our light square bishop. Doesn't matter because we're going g takes h6. We're threatening rook g7, and this is a devastating position for the black pieces. Let's say black takes here. We can go rook takes g7, and then we can do some other stuff. We can go queen g6 in order to go queen h7 mate, and the only way to deal with this is to delay it, and then after rook f1 king g2, there's not much you can do. Like, the only move in this position is queen g8, or you have to like give some sort of checks to delay checkmate, but this will be a forced checkmate in a couple of moves. Now, the reason why we were able to generate such an impressive attack is because we had the structure of these two pawns. We had d4, and more importantly, we had a pawn on e5. Pawn on e5 allowed us to not allow this knight to develop to f6, which would be a key defender of the h7 square, and it would oppose this bishop quite well. However, because that wasn't the case, and this knight was never on f6, this bishop was unable to oppose the bishop on d3, we were able to generate an attack. And what I want you to notice, another thing I want you to notice, is that this bishop was the most powerful attacker the whole time. So if I skip here and if I fast forward here, the reason why g5 works is because of this bishop right here, because this bishop threatens h7, and with the help of the queen, the bishop and the queen team up on h7, you're able to create tactical opportunities, and this is a very dangerous position for the black pieces. So black took, however, it was already too late because an attack is coming and this bishop will prevail. So make sure whenever you're trying to get a same side castling attack, preserve your light square bishop as much as possible. Try not to trade it off. For example, in some positions, some sort of knight before knight takes d3 can be played. Not here because the knight is controlling b4. However, avoid trading off this bishop as much as possible because it is a powerful attacker. The only time you would want to trade this bishop off is when this bishop is out here on f5 and it is doing a great job of protecting that king. And if you were to go bishop d3 to remove that bishop from the defense of the king, that would make a lot of sense. However, in those positions, it is difficult to attack anyways, so I don't think trading the bishop off would matter that much. Maybe you actually don't want to trade the bishop off, but that's besides the point. Keep this bishop as much as possible. Next position I'm going to show you, actually it's not a position, it's a game between David Howell, who is playing with the white pieces, versus Varuzan Akobian. So David here played e5, now this pawn is on e5, and we already talked about how this pawn can be used to generate an attack on the black king. So knight has to go back to e8, captures on d5, captures on d5, and here rook to e1 played, putting pressure on this entire file, because typically in these positions black creates counterplay with a move like f6. However, f6 weakens this pawn on e6, and that's why rook to e1 is such an important move, because if f6 is ever played, then this pawn is going to be very, very weak, and then knight g5 is an idea, bishop h3 is an idea to attack that pawn, and black would be in trouble. So this rook e1 is sort of a preventative measure against this f6, rook to c8, and then queen to d1. Another very high level theoretical move. If you go queen d3, there are some ideas with moves like knight c7, bishop a6, or knight to b8, bishop a6, and you do not want to get caught up in that. So in this position, queen to d1 is the top theoretical move. Queen to c7 played by black, knight to b1 trying to reroute this knight, and then b5 played by black, and both sides are just simply trying to maneuver their pieces around, and then a3 played by David Howell, and a5 played by black, captures. Here what I want you to notice is that if white plays bishop to d3, white will be controlling all of the major squares on the c-file, and black will not be able to infiltrate there. And this is very important because if this is done successfully, an attack can be generated on the black king without much counterplay by black. And in these positions, a typical attacking plan goes something like this: h4, bishop to d3, knight d2, knight f1, and this maneuver to g4. This is one of the most famous transfers of this knight from b1 to f1 to h2 to g4 in order to attack this king. It did not happen in this game, but I've had games myself where I did this maneuver, attacked the black king, and ended up winning these games. So bishop to d3 played by white, queen to b6, bishop to f4, and then knight to c7. Black's trying to generate some counterplay on the queen side here. Knight bd2, rook to a8, and here rook to c1, avoiding trades. And what I want you to notice is after a move like h4, white is getting ready to launch an attack. Once again, all of the space here belongs to white. White is taking as much space on this side as possible, and the black pieces are all over here on the queen side. Only this bishop is defending, and maybe this knight, if it goes to f8, it is going to be a good defender, but right now it is not defending the black king. So bishop to a6, trying to get rid of white's one of the most powerful attackers. Bishop e1, avoiding this trade. Knight to b5, knight to b3, rook c1, bishop c1, and then rook to c8. Knight to g5 played by David Howell. He's attacking h7 now, and after a move like knight to f8, queen h5, he is going in for the kill. Of course, bishop takes g5 has to be played because you have to get rid of this knight, or you have to get rid of an attacker. You cannot just simply play h6, you would lose f7. You cannot go g6 because the queen goes back and the dark squares are too weak. You cannot weaken the dark squares so much because then you're gonna run into trouble, because you can't really make a move here. There are no good moves because queen f7 is coming anyways, you would have to play f5 and then e takes f6. You're still going to lose here. In addition to getting almost mated, now this e6 pawn is also weak, which is something we talked about earlier. So even here, this e6 pawn ended up being quite weak. So there are lots of ideas here, lots of ways to generate an attack for white. And after bishop takes g5, getting rid of one of the attackers, bishop takes g5, and then knight takes d4. This was the losing blunder, although the position was still very bad, but this just hangs material because after bishop to e3, this knight is simply trapped. Bishop e2 was tried, but after bishop takes d4, this is just a winning position for the white pieces. Queen takes d4 and then queen takes e2. White ends up being up a piece. So what I want you to notice is that white in this game used an attack on the king to win material. So white was making threatening moves, creating as many threats as possible, and this was forcing black to make disadvantageous exchanges. This bishop for knight trade is not something black wants to do, it's something black has to do, and after a while there was nothing more to be done. That's why knight takes d4 was played in this position, because like what do you do here? You can't really do anything. You can't go anywhere with the knight. You can't do anything with this bishop. It's quite useless. You can't go in with the rook because all of the squares here are controlled. And how do you generate counterplay? The queen side is completely nullified by white, and f6 pawn break is also not possible. So there's nothing you can do here with the black pieces. You have no way of generating counterplay. Okay, now let's take a look at this position right here. And in this position, white has taken space with moves like e4 and then f4 and f5. So in a position like this, the way we want to continue an attack on the black king is by playing moves like g4, h4, and g5. Let's take a look at this right now. So after g4, let's say rook f to d8, h4, b5. Black is trying to create counterplay on the queen side. We go g5. We continue our attack over here. And after hg5, knight to h7, attacking this pawn. Now we go f6. So we are trying to open up this side of the board, even though we're sacrificing a pawn. Whenever you're attacking the king, forget about material, okay? Don't think about material too much. Don't think about sacrificing, especially just a single pawn, in order to open up your opponent's king. Let's say g takes f6, we go knight to d5. And here there's not really much that black can do. Let's say f takes g5, and then we take on b5, and then we sack the rook, we take on c6, and after bishop takes c6, this is a very simple remove the defender tactic. The knight was defending the bishop. It is no longer, so we can capture this bishop on e7, and this is going to lead to a devastating attack after a move like bishop to h5. How do you defend f7? Let's say rook to f8 here, but now we bring the queen to g4. Now we are threatening g5, and this is going to be over. Even if a move like f6 is played, this is simply not going to work. There are lots of options here. Probably queen e6 is also winning. Bishop g6 is a very clean win because this knight is actually stuck on h7. It has no legal moves, so we're going to scoop it up with moves like queen h5, or we can take and then go queen h5, leading to a checkmate in a couple of moves. King g2 to bring the rook to h1 is also an idea here. Okay, there's one last example that I want to show you. This game was played between Bobby Fischer with the white pieces and Oscar Pano with black. So in a position like this, Pano played d5, striking in the center, and Fischer went e5, and once again we have this structure right here where the pawns are on d4 and e5, and here Fischer is going to attack the black king eventually. Not immediately, but eventually he will generate an attack here. So bishop to d7, knight to c3, rook to c8, both sides just simply developing here. Nothing interesting going on just yet. It's just developmental moves, trying to prevent knight c4 with a move like b3, knight to e2, retreating, bishop to b5, queen to d2, and after knight to c6, here is when Fischer begins his attack. So let's take a look at white's pieces in this position. Queen is good, the bishop is good, the knight is decent, the bishop on g2 will be developed later on. It doesn't have any great squares right now. The rooks are fine. However, this knight on e2 feels a bit passive. It's only defending d4 and it's not really doing much else. So in a position like this, Fischer found an incredible way to improve this piece, and he went g4. Now, g4 is a multi-purpose move. It controls these two squares, f5 and h5. It disallows the knight from going to f5. It also frees up this g3 square for the knight. So this knight that's very passive right now, it can transfer to g3 and help out with the attack. And that is exactly what happened. Knight to g3, queen to b6, h4, Fischer continuing to attack on this side of the board, knight to b8, bishop to h6, getting rid of one of king's defenders, knight to d7, queen to g5, captures here, and after bishop takes h6, queen takes h6, this defender of the black king has been removed. Now black has to be very careful. Knight to g5 is a game-winning threat, so black has to guard against that. Black has to be very, very careful here. Rook captures on c8, knight captures on c8. Now knight to g5 is not as effective because there's knight to f8, so Fischer continues with h5, and here Oscar Pano blunders with this move, queen to d8. He thought that by bringing the queen here, he would be able to defend better, but this actually allows knight to g5 right now. And of course, after knight g5, as we said, knight to f8 is forced. However, there is an absolutely brilliant move in this position, which Fischer found. And this move is bishop to e4, an incredible move. First things first, the bishop cannot be taken. This will lead to a devastating attack with knight takes e4. The knight is coming to f6. Nobody can stop this knight from going to f6. So you might have to sacrifice the queen here. And of course, that would still lead to checkmate. So this doesn't help. So other than that, what do you do here as the black pieces? Do you just ignore the threat? Let's say you go queen to c7, you decide to ignore the threat. H takes g6, let's say h takes g6, and here there's knight to h5. So after knight to h5, there's g takes h5, and then here there is once again a mating attack here, leading to checkmate with queen takes f8. So this is an absolutely devastating position. Even if f takes g6 is played, there is a beautiful tactic here. There's queen takes f8 and then knight takes e6. So this would also be winning for the white pieces, and white is actually winning a full piece here. It might look like white is only winning a pawn because this bishop is hanging, but this bishop is also hanging. So actually white is winning a whole piece, not just a pawn. So this is a completely winning position for white, and there's not much that Oscar Pano can do here. So in this position, he played queen to e7. However, at this point, there's not much you can do. Fischer went knight takes h7, knight takes h7, hg6, fg6, and after bishop takes g6, he simply has a winning attack. Knight to g5 was played, however, this allows knight to h5. Now this knight is also coming into the attack, and after knight to f3, it doesn't really matter. Black is going to give a couple of checks, but he's going to run out of checks eventually, and after knight takes g6, this ended in a checkmate after knight to f6, and then queen to h7. Not even capturing this knight here, by the way. Knight to f6, ultra precise, ultra surgical move, king to f7, queen to h7, and after a move like king to f8, you're not taking the knight here, you're mating the black king. So this is an absolutely wonderful example of how you create same side castling attacks. The conditions were met, as you can see. Let me just go back. The conditions were met right here. There were pawns on d4 and e5. Follow the chain, right? You want to play on the side of the board where your central pawn chain is looking towards. In this case, it's looking towards this side of the board, and Fischer was able to generate a beautiful attack on that side, while black struggled to create counterplay on the queen side.